We're joined now by the late developer, Mick Wallace, who has salted away fortunes, I think, in the Cayman Islands, and who's expected to continue to make further fortunes. Mick, from your perspective, by the way, folks, that was a joke, but from
as a matter of interest, where are the Cayman Islands?
From your perspective, tell us how the property bubble arose. As a developer, when did you get a sense, God, there's a fortune to be made here?
Well, I would say in the middle 90s, it was obvious that there was going to be a lot of development going ahead. The EC money started to come in, I suppose, in the early 90s, around 1990, 91. We started to get money for civil engineering projects, which consists mostly of infrastructure of different types. And it kind of kick-started a lot of work for the civil engineering end. And from there, I would say there was kind of more money becoming available. And the flow of money obviously had a huge influence on the whole issue, just the same as the lack of it today is having a huge influence on what's going on now. I suppose around 96, 97, it was obvious that prices were starting to rise at a nice steady pace, and it looked as if it was a good idea for anyone who didn't have development land, that it was a good idea, if you could get your hands on it, that it was likely to be profitable. Now, unfortunately, not many builders would have had land because land bankers were very few, and the majority of the land was held by a very small group of people, and they were the ones who probably were making the most money.
Were these developers themselves?
Not necessarily so.
Who would they have been? Now, you don't have to name them, or
I mean,
farmers?
There wouldn't have been farmers, no. There would have been speculators, but not necessarily developers. Speculators who would sell to developers. But they obviously, right up until 2007, which was the end of the boom, well, it really probably ended in the late 2006, they did have a strong control over the price of land that was sold to developers come builders. People have this notion that builders made a fortune because the price kept going up, but the builders were having to buy land from guys that owned it, and as the market kept rising, they kept paying more for it. And of course, a lot of the problems going into NAMA today are huge acquisitions made at too high a price, because if you wanted to stay in the game, you had to keep buying sites. I mean, I for one, I obviously wasn't a land banker. I would have started developing. I bought land first in the late 90s, and land was cheap then. I bought land around 96, 97, and it was cheap, and we built on it. And
where was this?
Sorry, well, the first development piece we did was actually where the present Italian quarter is, and
on the Keys. Yeah.
On the Keys, yeah. So the land was relatively cheap, and the price was going up all the time while we were building. But before we finished it, we knew that if we wanted to do more development, we had to buy more sites, go for permission. If you wanted to buy a site in 2001, you knew that it'd be 2003 before you could build on it, because you've got to buy the site, close the contract, you've got to hire an architect, design it, get planning permission. If you get permission, then you've got to go for your fire cert, you've got to get a structural consultant engineer on board, and you've got to get a mechanical and electrical consultant, and then you're liable to have objections. You're looking at a minimum of 2 years from the time you purchase it. So if you wanted to stay in the game, you had to keep buying. So before you finish a project, you have to buy another site or two, And when you be halfway through those...
Why do you have to do this? Why
Well, I mean,
didn't you just stop? You'd made enough money after 2 or 3 years. Why didn't you just stop?
Well, I mean, I wasn't, to be honest with you, I wasn't driven by making money. I was never very interested in making money, to be honest. But I was, I enjoyed what I was doing. We tried to do it well. Given direct labour to about 130 people brought a certain pleasure as well. And I suppose for someone that I do think that it gave me advice as well that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't in business.
What do you mean?
I mean, okay, for example, I mean, you probably know I put up 5 different banners at different stages, and if
opposing the Nice Treaty, I think.
well,
Wasn't
that
it?
was one of them anyway. I mean,
Iraq was
the
another.
war in Iraq, the bombing of Lebanon, bombing of Yugoslavia. I had banners up for all of those. But if some guy on a 9-to-5 job working in an office down the Keys had put him up, he'd been written off as a crank. But because I was seen to be relatively successful in business, they took a lot of notice to it. And
Mind you, the banners were 4 stories high.
well, they were pretty big, yeah.
pretty
But I
big,
mean,
yeah.
I couldn't have made them so big if I didn't have a big building to put them
Indeed,
on.
and that's true, yeah.
But
So
I mean,
it was your love of humanity that caused you to continue in the building and the development world, was it?
my love of humanity.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bit strong now. I mean, listen, of course, every job I did, I tried to make money on it, and I generally did. And
Did you make a lot of money?
I didn't make a lot of money. I mean, everything is relative. I mean, I wasn't a big player.
Would you have made 50 million?
God, I forget.
I wouldn't have been that much, Mick. Sure would it? It wouldn't have been 50.
Well, anyway, all we know is that we owe plenty now anyway.
Can you tell us how much you owe?
At the moment, about 40 million.
And you can still sleep at night.
Oh yeah, but I work hard, so I'm tired.
Yeah.
So it's easy to sleep when you're tired.
And what assets do you have to back that 40 million?
Actually, we'd have a lot of apartments, offices, shops. It would have been worth close to double that a couple of years ago, but obviously it's worth less now. And
One of the points that Frank Daly was making today in his speech to the Leinster Society of Chartered Accountants was that a lot of the developers continue to overvalue their assets, and that this is a continuing problem in their dealings with NAMA. Are you overvaluing
well, I mean,
their
if
assets?
the developer overvalued his assets, so did the bank that kept giving them money. And I mean,
No, I mean, as of now, they're continuing to overvalue their assets.
no, I don't. I mean, I'm the one who's. I'm one of the people who said when Brian Lenihan said that the stuff going into NAMA was worth 54 billion and they were going to pay, or it was worth 47 billion and was going to pay 54 for it. I reckon it was worth somewhere around 30. And I still think that the stuff going into NAMA has been overvalued. And I think the taxpayer has been sold short.
Is any of your properties, any of your assets going to, or any of your borrowings going to NAMA?
Unlikely. Most of my borrowings are with foreign banks. But to give you an idea, I mean, I have a powerful site in one of the best areas of Dublin City, and I owe 7 million on it. And to sell it today, absolute max 2.5 million is all I get for it. And I have permission for fantastic houses on it. And this is a real good site. And if the market ever recovers, this is a decent site. But if it's gone from 7 million to 2.5, and when you consider a lot of the stuff gone into NAMA is going to go back to agricultural land and isn't worth a whole lot.
Are you able to borrow any money now to develop sites or to complete the development of
No,
sites?
the banks have been closed in this country for 18 months, and I mean, it's galling to listen to advertisements on the radio and television telling us that the banks are open for business. The banks, when Lenihan originally gave recapitalisation money to the Bank of Ireland and AIB, he told us this was so that the banks would lend again to business. That hasn't happened. That's 18 years. That was September 08, right? 18 months ago, more, nearly 20 months ago. And any talks that I've had with any of the banks that I deal with in the last couple of months, they have no intention of opening this year either. And the whole notion that I mean, there's little doubt that the financial industry is rotten to the core, and it's hard to credit that the taxpayers' money is being used instead of creating jobs for people. They were giving it to banks in the hope that they get back on their feet and make everything right again.
You say the financial industry is rotten to the core. Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, if you've only to look at what's going on in the investigation into Goldman Sachs at the moment. It's a very much, it's a good preview into what they were all at. AIB, who were at one stage telling us that they'd rather be dead than be recapitalised. They've been very economical with the truth for a long time, and unfortunately so have the government. I mean, we don't even have to talk about Anglo. I mean, the dogs in the street know that Anglo is a basket case, even though Brian Lenihan keeps telling us that it won't cost the taxpayer money, which nobody believes anymore. And not many people in the industry would have believed it in the first place.
Did you, by the way, during the year, say from 2006 2007, you, I assume, heard the rumours about Anglo-Irish Bank, that it was a basket case then. Did you believe them?
It was pretty obvious that Anglo wasn't run in a very tight fashion. I didn't foresee the crisis no more than anyone else in this country, and a lot of the people who claimed
That's not true. Other people did see it. Certainly FASTA saw it. This is my NGO. We had a video conference on why the banks were shortly going to be in very serious trouble. It's on the net, you can see it. It was a public meeting, only about 20 people, a couple of months before the crisis in the summer.
Which summer?
2008.
Yes. Because you can see it even from central bank reports, how much the banks had lent to property. It was quite obvious, and it was out of kilter with other countries.
Once you had seen the statistics, yes, but the recession, from my point of view, started in October, November '06. I bought my last site in October '06, and I knew a month later I'd made a mistake.
Yeah, well, we sold our property a year before the top because it was obvious to a valuer trained in the traditional sense of valuing property by a rental stream that it did not make any sense. It was part luck, but I was so relieved indeed to sell that property. And I was involved in development too in the early days of Temple Bar, but I stopped development by the late 1990s because it didn't make any sense. I mean, Ireland was competitive up until the year 2000, and the value that was added by our exporting industries got attached to land.
That's right.
And that was not taxed back by the government. That wasn't value created by the landowner, and what happened was developers like yourself moved in and captured that value by converting it into saleable property. And then, of course, the banks got involved in it as well. I mean, uniquely in Europe, in any developed country, we don't have a cadaster that would tell you who owns land.
Don't have a what?
A cadaster, it's called a property register that tells you who owns land. So 8 people owned most of the important development land in Dublin, and the local authorities didn't even know who they were, and the normal developers like yourself, couldn't.
8 people?
Roughly 8 people.
These are the speculators that Mick was talking
about. Yes, that's right. And our government didn't even know and had no means easily of finding out.
Presumably out of
Of course they did. Of course they did. And we have no property tax of any kind. So other countries that had the same kind of growth did not have the same kind of boom because they had some element of property taxes that dampened it.
Yes, but also, Emer, I mean, if you take France,
and a land tax is the tax we should have had.
No, I totally agree with you about that. But in France, for example, no bank can lend more money to a person than they can afford to repay. I mean, that is one of the extraordinary things, and one of the reasons why, for example, no French bank has collapsed. It is illegal under French law to lend people more money than they can afford to repay.
Better regulation of the banks is definitely part of the issue.
Of course.
But you could have had foreign banks coming in,
I
and
wonder
indeed
about
Irish
this
banks
regulation of the
in
banks, because the
Poland.
banks, like most industries, like most businesses,